Welcome CSC 121, Fall 2020, Programming 1 to Exercise 19, the Random Number Analyzer. And I know how you like to analyze random numbers right before the holidays, so that's what we're going to do. And we're going to create an empty list that's a bunch of random numbers just between 1 and 10. So it'll just be on a very small scale that we'll practice with using the random module. And we use a for loop to go through that and actually create a random number list, just like we did with random names. And then within that same loop, we'll create a list of our random numbers and we'll append them to our nums list. And then we're going to use the count method to count how many of each came up, just so we can analyze, wow, there were 3 1s and 2 2s or something like that. So that's what we're going to do. And first we're going to do it by just printing it out with a bunch of print statements. And then we'll actually use a loop to actually go through and do that and analyze them with just kind of one line, so we don't have to use 10 lines of code to print them out. So you're going to have something to start. So you can go to MyWarren and go into the assignment for Random Number Analyzer and click on the link, and you're going to fork that link using the fork button. This changed a little bit from the previous year, the way you fork it, the way it looks here. So you can see there's nothing here, but there are instructions. So you're going to just fork it, and it's going to go into your count, and then you should go in here and put, I don't know if I did this on the last exercise, you should put your first name, your last name, first initial here, and hit enter. And then even if you go back to your repels, I don't know if I did this on the previous one either, but if you go back to your previous one, you should put this into your 121. And actually on the previous exercise, I didn't put my last name on here, so I should probably go in there and do that, even though you already did this exercise and I forgot to do that when I recorded the video for that one. But if you didn't do that one, you could put your last name, first initial on that one too, and then just go back to your repels, because it's fairly easy to do, and then make sure that's in your folder. That way everything's organized. So I'm using the Random Number Analyzer, and I'll click on this, and there'll be no code here, but there will be instructions. Create an empty list named nums equals that. I can just copy that. That way I'll have that. I don't have to do that. And I'll just paste that in there. And I'll hit return. I'll go back to my instructions, and then it says use a for loop to generate 10 random numbers between 1 and 10 using randint. And it says remember to use import random. And it's a good thing it said that, because I would have forgot that. So go to the top and put in import random. And so now we're going to use a for loop and generate the numbers, and then we'll append them to the nums list. So we have to do that next. Okay, so let's think about that. We're going to use a for loop. And we're going to say for I in range. Now we're dealing with numbers, so we could probably use range. So we'll use for I in range. And what's our range going to be? Well, it mentioned using 10, and it says between 1 and 10. So we can use that. And then each time we're going to append that number, that random or whatever we use as a variable name, to a list. So we have a list of random numbers. Then we'll analyze it. So we first have to put a range in here, and we'll use 1, 10. Well, actually, we'll just put 10 here. We're just doing it 10 times, so we don't need a range here. We need a range for the random int. We don't need a range for this. For this, we could just do it 10 times. So this, we're just doing it 10 times. That's how many times we're generating a random number. And then we're going to say, well, I guess we'll just use rn and say equals random.randint. And then this is the one where we could put the range of 1 through 10, and it'll use the bottom and the top end of the range. So this will generate a random number. So now it's going to go through the loop once. It's going to generate a random. It's going to generate a rn. Now what's going to happen to that rn? That rn is going to be appended to our nums list. So we can say nums.append. Remember, it's a method. So we take our list name and then say nums.append, just like here. And then in here, we're going to say append rn, because we're generating that rn each time and we're putting it in the list. So this should generate 10 random numbers. And then we could print out our list just to see what's happening. We could just say print nums, just to see what's happening here in the first part of this. So we should just have a list of random numbers. And each time we run the code, it should do that. So let's see. There's random numbers. And you can see we had 2 8s, 3 8s. So if 8 was your lucky number, you got 3 8s out of that. This one, if 4 was your lucky number, 4 4s, that's a lot. And that's why we're going to analyze it. Now you're thinking, boy, I wish we can analyze these numbers. That's what we're going to do next. We're going to analyze how many there are. So that's all we're doing there. Now we have this list, and we have a list each time we run. Now what we're going to do, we're going to analyze it. So what we're going to do to analyze it, and we're going to do it kind of a long way first, and then we're going to do it a short way. Now let's just look at our instructions. And it says look up the W3 Schools method called count to analyze. So this is how you analyze how many ones there are. So when you look at this list, you want to analyze how many 10s. So you'd have to count that there were 10 10s. So you have to do it for each number. So you'd have to do this 10 times. You'd have to count each number. So if you go to the count method, they have this under our list methods. Remember, this is list methods under Python list, and they have a count method. And their example isn't a great example because if you see, they're using apple, banana, and cherry, and they're counting how many cherry there is in the list, which it's 1. So that's not that helpful, but at least you see how it works. Just for example, let's put another cherry there and make it a little more exciting. Now there's 2 cherries in the list, and what it's doing is it's using a variable to hold the count. So X represents the count of cherry, and you could even say X cherry or num cherry or something like that, and then print out num cherry, because we're going to kind of do something like that. So there's num cherry, so we're going to print the num of cherry. The anticipation killing me, and there's 2 in there. So that's the way it works. And notice it's using it's a method. So just like before, we're using the list name and the method, and inside for the argument, we're putting what we're counting, and we're going to do that with numbers. So let's apply that to numbers. So what we're going to do is just count how many ones first. So let's go down here and we'll make a variable. I guess we'll make a variable. That's what they were doing here. They were making a variable first. Now we'll make a variable that makes sense. We'll say number of ones. That'll be number, you could type out num1, but that'll be the number of ones. The number of ones is going to equal nums, the list, dot count, the method, and it's going to be the number of ones. Then we're going to have to print it out. Then we're going to have to say print n1. And we're going to print it out in a way that makes some sense. So if you just print n1, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It would almost be better to do like an F statement, and n1 is going to be the count of ones, and whether you do ones first, I'm going to put in something like ones and then a colon and then a space, and it'll say ones, and then it'll give me the number of ones. That way, if you copy this, you could do 2s and all the way down, and it'll give you the number. But let's just try that out. So what's going to happen here is it's taking, that's the count of 1, and it's putting there, and then we're just putting a string in here saying ones, and this is going to be the count. So let's see if this works just by doing it with 1 time. And there's our list, and there's 1 1, and it's saying ones. Now if we took this further, we'd have to make 18 more lines of code to do this. We'd have to do this, and we'd have to do that, and call this n2, because maybe I won't do all this, because we're actually not going to do all this, but I'm just showing you for now what we'd have to do to analyze all these. We'd have to make an n2, and then we'd have to change this to 2s, and then we'd have to change this to n2, and now when we run it, now there's our 2s, and let's just see if it's correct. There's 2 1s, and there's 1 2. So it's working. So you'd have to keep doing this and have 20 lines of code just for the variable and the print statement, which isn't very efficient, especially if you had a lot of numbers to do. And the chances of making mistakes is high here because we're changing a lot of things. We're copying, pasting. I mean, how many times do you make mistakes doing that? But anyway, this is working. You want to find out it works first. Sometimes you're going to do it the harder way just to make sure it works, and then do it the easier way. Because sometimes the easier way is more efficient, but it's harder to understand. Like this is easier to understand. Okay, we're doing the count method. We're getting a number that represents the count of ones, and then we're printing it out next to this. So that makes sense. But maybe there's an easier way to do that. Let's just make sure this is working. We have 2 1s, we have 0 2s, and we have 1 3. So we're not getting a lot of hits here of certain numbers. Before we take this further, and I mean, you know what I'm talking about. We're going to have to do this all through 10, and then we're going to have to do this through 10. But let's see if there's an easier way. I guess what I'll do is I'll put this before here because we'll get rid of this because we don't even need this. But we're going to do another loop, and we're going to say for I in range. Now this time we're going to do a range, and I'm going to do between 1 and 11 only because it'll make sure that it doesn't include 0. And because if we just did 1 and 10, when we use range, this does 10 times, but when we do range 1 and 10, it doesn't do the upper, so it'll only do 0 through 9. It'll only do that many times. So We're going to put 111. And we're doing that so it starts at 1 because we're going to use this 1 in here, and I have to make sure my I in here, because what's going to happen, I is going to go through here, and I is going to kind of start at the 1 and go through 1 and then go through 1 and 10, and it won't do 11. But I is going to represent 1, and then I is going to represent 2, and I is going to, and when you have those numbers, that I can basically represent what's going to happen here. So let me just kind of put my colon here, and a couple things are going to happen. Is one is we could put our count in here. So let me just copy this and put it in here before we get rid of it. And instead of saying n1, we just want to do this one time. So let's just do n. We'll just say n equals nums.count. And it's not going to be 1, it's going to be I. It's going to be whatever it is that time. So the first time it's going to go through, it's going to say n equals the count of I, which is 1, and n's going to hold how many that is. And then what we're going to do, instead of adding it to a list, we're just going to print it out. So let's do this. Let's take this print statement here and stick this in here. So we're just taking all these things that we're doing 10 times and doing them in here 10 times as a loop. So let's just get rid of all this. You could comment it out if you want to do, let's see, I think you can right click and go to the command palette, and if you say comment, it says add line comment. They have a shortcut here, and you could comment all that out. So that way, if you still want it for some reason, it's still there. You didn't delete it all. Now I'm getting a red wavy line because there's no n1, but there's an n. And instead of 1s here, what you could do in here, remember, this is going to be the number. That's going to be the number that it's counting. Why don't we just put that here? And we could put I here. And if you put I in there, it's going to say 1s, and then it's going to be whatever the count came up with. And then when it cycles through the second time, it's going to be 2s, and it's going to be the number that it came up with. And then so on and so on. So it should go through there that many times. Now, I think if we just did 1 and 10, it would just do, it wouldn't get us all the numbers. Let's just start with that and see what it does. And you can see it's doing 1s, and it's only going up to 9. So it's still starting at 1, but it's not including that one. So it's not giving us any 10s, which may come up here. So if we go to 11, that'll do it. So let's run it again. And now there's our list. And let's just check our list. Okay, it says there's 2 1s. Are there? Yes. Are there 2 2s? Yes. Are there 1 3? Yes. Is there 1 4? Yes. No 5s, no 6s, and no 8s. Correct? There's only 1 7. There's 1 9, and then there's 2 10s. So this is working out. So this is a way to make this more efficient. This loop here is we're running through the loop, and we're just using n to represent the count each time. So it's doing it each time. So we don't have to make 10 counts. We're just making 1 count, but we're outputting it 10 times. And then we're just using the I iterator because that's going through, and it's getting the 1, the 2, the 3. It's going right through that numbered list. The numbered range we have there, and we're just using that. So that's replacing this. So this I is replacing this, and this n we're using just 1 time. We're only creating 1 end is replacing these. So we don't have to use n1, n2, n3, and we don't have to go back and forth. So that's just a way to take, something like this, which isn't that easy to do. But the nice thing is, let's just say you had to analyze random numbers from 1 through 100. Now we'd have to change this to like 101 or something. Let's just see if this works. There's 100 random numbers, and out of those 100 random numbers, which ones came up the most? You could just go through here and figure out, and there's probably even a way to analyze that. That's where you started getting into analytics. That's where you get into more serious programs where you're analyzing this instead of looking through it and go, oh, where's the longest list? You could figure out what number is popping up the most. And I see 14 was popping up the most here. So that's another way to kind of do that. So you could certainly scale this. That's called scaling it. So we're making little simple things here to start, just to understand what's happening. Hopefully you understand it more when we're doing it kind of on a small scale. But then you could take it and scale it for larger numbers. And that's where you start getting into financials and polls, and you start analyzing real data. That's what data analytics is. I don't get into data analytics, but that's what Python's used for. So it can analyze numbers. So that's why you could kind of scale this. Now we're just analyzing, hey, I have a random number between 1 and 10. Let me clear this out. and just run it again. If you ever need to just go to the beginning again and see it, because it'll keep going down, and we had that thing that went really far. So now you could always go here and clear it out, and then you'll just see these and just make sure it's working. So that's all you really have to do here. Like I said, you can try this out just like I did to start, but then go in here and actually do it so it's more efficient. So we only have a couple lines of code. I mean, we have like 7-8 lines of code to do all that. And like I said, you can analyze a lot of numbers with a little bit of code just by being more efficient with these loops. So that's exercise 19, the random number analyzer. When you're done, just share it and go back into your myWarn and put it into the add comment. Make sure you choose new window.